So welcome everyone to Inclusive Citation Practices. I'm so happy to have you all here today. I'm really excited about doing this workshop. I'm also a little bit nervous. I feel that this is a topic that I am still learning a lot about. And so, it's something that I've been interested in and I've looked into, but I definitely don't really consider myself an expert. So I hope that other folks who have expertise in this area will also be willing to chime in, to share resources if you have them, so that we can get a great discussion going around this topic. Absolutely, Leo. Completely agree with that. So for anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Jane Hammonds. I am the Teaching and Learning Engagement Librarian in the Ohio State University Libraries. You can contact me at hammonds.73@osu.edu. Please do get in touch if you have any questions, comments. I love to chat more with folks about these kinds of topics. So go ahead and just get in touch if you would like. Yep, we will all learn together. Great attitude, Leo. Wonderful. All right, so we're going to be doing today, we're going to look at some different definitions and descriptions of inclusive citation practices and what that actually entails. We'll talk a little bit about the implications of citations and inclusive citations for us as scholars, as researchers, as teachers, as librarians, whatever role that we might happen to be in. And then I'm going to share some resources, some strategies, thinking about our roles as researchers, as teachers, to support more inclusive citation practices. I would like to start with just a quick poll just to see, how familiar folks might be with the concept or the idea of inclusive citations. So I'm going to do this as a Zoom poll. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that poll. And I'll give everyone a chance to respond, just rating really quickly your familiarity with the concept of inclusive citations. I'll give it just about 10 more seconds, just make sure everyone has a chance to respond. Looks like we've got a good number of people who have participated. So we'll go ahead and end the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. In the poll, share results. Hopefully you all should be able to see the results. So we have, about 16%, about 10 folks who say that they are fairly familiar with the practice of the concept of inclusive citations, but a good number who are somewhat familiar or not really familiar at all, which is great. That's why we're here today, to learn more about this topic. So thank you all for sharing your response there. And I'll just mention, related to the poll really quickly, we do have some interactive elements in the presentation today. And I definitely encourage and appreciate participation, but I do understand that this is lunchtime. If folks, are more comfortable just sitting and listening, that is perfectly okay as well. There's no requirement to participate, no breakout rooms, so don't have to worry about those coming up. But we'll use, chat, we'll use Jamboards, those kinds of things for some potential interaction. All right, so what are we talking about when we talk about inclusive citation practices? What does this actually mean? So I wanted to start off this section with a quote from an article by Kristen Smith and Dominique Garrett-Scott, looking at the citation rate for Black women in anthropology. And you can see that they find that despite the productivity and the practice and the writing of Black women anthropologists, that they are not being cited at a level that is consistent with their participation in the field, right? And so I highlighted the part of that, we are not named. Their work is not being cited, especially by, non-Black colleagues, are not citing the work of Black women anthropologists. And so I started with this quote just as an idea to, first of all, just kind of provide a little bit of a framing for what we're going to be talking about today, about why this is important, what this issue, means. I also really wanted to mention Kristen Smith, who's been one of the really important voices in promoting the idea and the need for more inclusive citation practices, and really critically thinking about our citation practices. She's a founder of the Cite Black Women Collective, which I'll mention again later on. So I thought it was really relevant to start with a quote that she provided to give some framing around this issue before we go forward and think more specifically about definitions. Right. So I did want us to have a chance to do some potential collaborative definition building, where we can start to think about, based on our own experience, our own understanding, even if we're not that familiar with the term, what we think inclusive citation actually means, or what we think it would entail to be more inclusive in our citation practices. So we'll do this as a Jamboard, and I'll share the link to the Jamboard in the chat again for folks so that everyone can have access to that. So we'll go ahead and we'll go out to that Jamboard and take a look and let everyone have a chance to share again, if you feel comfortable, what you think might be involved when we think about inclusive citations. I'm gonna go ahead and exit out of here if I can and go to our Jamboard. All right, so if you haven't used the Jamboard before, I think the easiest way to add a response is to go over here to the left-hand side. You can see an option to add a sticky note. You can pop your sticky note up there and just type what you would like and go ahead and post that. You can also type in, using a text box if you would like to do that, whatever's easiest. And again, yeah, if you don't know, that's why you're here. That's fine to include as well. So we'll just let everyone have a chance to share their ideas around what they know about inclusive citation or what they think inclusive citation might entail. Also, while you're here, that is perfectly understandable for those folks that's why you're here, and that's great. We are glad to have you here for that. Mhm. So we see a lot of responses that are coming in. So not only including, but prioritizing work by authors who are marginalized in our society, considering all potential authors, not just the most well-cited or the ones that are known, ensuring historically underrepresented voices are being heard. I don't know, but based on the article you shared, I'm thinking it's that citations tend to be biased away from minority researchers. Absolutely. Finding original sources and avoiding whitewashing of information, giving appropriate credit. Absolutely. Seeking out publications that include a variety of perspectives, being intentional about including diverse voices, being thoughtful that the sources we use in our research writing represent a variety of voices. Absolutely. Let's see. Yeah, mindful of which voices are represented in the research that we cite, ensuring all voices that are represented. So yeah, we're definitely seeing the theme here, right? About mindfulness, being intentional, really thinking critically about who we are citing, right? And we see the word representation a lot. So making sure that our research and our writing is representing a wide range of different voices. Yeah, absolutely. These are all great responses. Thank you all so much for sharing. Eileen, I did notice that you had unmuted for a second. Was there something that you wanted to say? If not, that's okay. All right, so we'll go ahead and go back to our presentation then. So great, thank you all for sharing your responses. So I'm going to share a few definitions, and there's a few different terms that have been used to sort of describe the same concept or very similar concepts. So I'm going to share a few different types of definitions because I think they all bring something different or something valuable to the party when we're thinking about what we're talking about with inclusive citations. This is a definition that was put together by Andrea Baer from Rowan University, who describes inclusive citation as approach to citing, so including intellectual, creative, and works from individuals from a diversity of different backgrounds and experiences, and really highlights that this is, an intentional thing about counteracting the dominant power structures that have, historically marginalized certain voices. Right? So there's one definition of inclusive citation. Again, I'm going to just mention a few different other sort of similar or related definitions. So I've also heard the term inclusive referencing, so very similar, right? So this prioritizing, including non-dominant voices where they are relevant. And especially I like this idea of including voices and perspectives from the group that you are looking at or from groups that are affected by the topic. right? How important that is, I think, to incorporate it into our definition or understanding of inclusive citation. A few other definitions. Citation justice or citational justice is another term that I've heard related to this that I think has, the very similar intention about really being intentional about the authors that we cite, thinking about the identity of the authors that we cite, and trying to intentionally uplift or include those marginalized voices, just really paying attention to the inequalities that are within citational practices, and making those efforts to really try to include works from those groups that are typically not cited as often. And then not one last term that I wanted to share, this idea of resistance research, so that we're very intentionally thinking about our research practices in a way that is intended to resist those traditional power structures. So incorporating very deliberately EDI principles into our research practices. And so thinking about the biases thinking about our own biases, thinking about the biases in terms of how we go about citing sources, and making those more intentional efforts to really include relevant perspectives or voices. So I'll just kind of flip back through those really quickly to just give everyone a chance to just take a look at those again. So we have inclusive citation, then we have the idea of inclusive referencing. So again, same concept, a slightly different term. We have the idea of citation justice, citational justice, and then this idea of resistance research. So I found these to be all, just different terms to get at the same basic concept. And I would love to hear if folks are aware of any other terms that are used out there. I have found as I've been researching this topic that there's not a ton out there about this yet. And it doesn't seem like there's, been sort of a understanding of the one particular term that's going to be used. People tend to be referring to it using slightly different terms or different phrases. So I'd like to hear from folks as we've had a chance to think about those definitions. Are any aspects of those definitions that you found that really spoke to you or that seem to be really relevant to you as a researcher, as a scholar, as a librarian, as a teacher, whatever role that you might be in? Any of aspects of those definitions that really spoke to you or really seem relevant to you. And also if there's anything that you would add to any of those definitions, anything that you see that is missing when we're thinking about what inclusive citation might look like. So if you would like to, you can go ahead and add your response to the chat. So I'll give everyone a chance to think about that and see if anyone has anything that they would like to share. Can share the full bibliographic reference to the quoted definitions that you shared. Yeah, so all of the references are at the end. The full references for all of those are at the end of the presentation. So Rebecca shared, I like the idea of citational justice, foregrounding non-dominant voices. Wonderful. Sarah shared, I don't know that I had previously thought of references and research as an area for justice, but it makes perfect sense. So Hillary shared, inclusiveness is an important aspect to consider for health sciences research, and it sometimes can leave data wanting. Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the things I was thinking about, Hillary, is we've all been, heard of those, the studies that have only been done on men. And so they missed the signs of this, disease in women because, they only had men as the research subjects, those kinds of things. So we had a question come in from David. Is there an issue related to language and inclusive citation? So I think, David, if I'm reading your question right, in terms of only citing English language publications, if that's the issue that you are talking about, then yes, that is part of this. Absolutely. That English tends to be the most cited, dominant language out there. So we're missing research that is not in English. Yes. Judy shared, I love this sound of resistance research. Not sure it applies to anything for me at this moment, but I love what it seems to represent. Yes. Let's see, Ajit, sorry, if I mispronounce the name. My research area is STEM, and the part about avoiding citing the same dominant voices feels very relevant to me. And I really liked citation justice as a relevant. So I don't know, Leo shared, I don't know if this applies here, but beyond seeking inclusive citations, the way they are presented is important. I see you've been doing it by including the full name for non-men, so we don't assume the author is a man. And actually, I will say, Leo, that was not a deliberate choice on my part in doing that. But I think that's a really important point to raise in terms of how we include the name. And if we include someone's full name or just a last name as part of the citation. So yeah, thank you for raising that point. Michelle shared, our databases are designed to highlight highly cited or cited references, and this is often misleading to researchers. Lucky, watch out. Quantity sometimes does not equal quality. That's a really great point, and one of the sort of guidance that you can think about in terms of how you can be more inclusive is to move away from that limiter that puts the most relevant or the most cited things first. Cameron shared, I like the idea of citational justice, but I worry it's performative, like critiques on building a syllabus with diverse authors, but never addressing intersectional issues in the content. Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And I'm going to mention that again later on about the performative nature of it. Absolutely. Yeah, great. So Madeline shared, this really makes me question what's being missed when researchers rely heavily on citation and journal metrics when writing reviews. Absolutely. Great point, Madeline. Wonderful. So thank you all for sharing your comments there. So I did want to take a step back really quickly and see one more comment coming in. What is included in a database Jerry shared is also problematic. Removing articles and putting them in a separate resource can make the material unavailable to some. Lucia shared, until very recently, it was rare to find members of minority groups cited in studies of early modern European writers, such as Shakespeare. Growing number of scholars are involved in race before race studies. Thank you for sharing information about that, Lucia. Absolutely. All right, so just to take a little bit of a step back and think about, again, the big picture of why this is all important, I thought it would be helpful just to briefly kind of think about the power of citations, the role that citations play. So this is just a reflection for you. You can share if you would like, but it's not required, about why we think inclusive citation or citation justice is important to us, to scholars, those who are being cited or those who are not being cited, right? And the researchers, so the folks that are doing the writing at that time. And we've already started to get into some of this in the comments that folks have been sharing. But just a few things that I wanted to highlight, right? We know that citations really matter, and they matter in a lot of different ways. They matter to us as scholars, they matter to us as researchers, they matter to us as teachers, as librarians. The quote from Kristen Smith and Dominic Garrett Scott, right? Citations determine whether we are perceived as academic subjects or objects, right? Are we the ones being cited? Are we the ones being talked about, right? By others who are talking about us, right? And Mahabali, who's also been a really important voice in raising the issue of inclusive citations, right, raises the point that what are we missing if we aren't including diverse voices? And that came through in the comments as well, right? If we're just citing the same people over and over again, right, those most cited people, right, there are voices that we are missing. There are important perspectives out there that we are missing, that we are not including in our research, right? Right. And we know that citations, are what creates that web of knowledge, that creates that understanding within our disciplines, within our field. They're a form of scientific currency. They're a form of academic currency, right? Citations are used, we know, in the tenure and promotion process as proxies for quality and impact, right? I've just been writing a statement of impact related to my tenure case. And, I got some feedback about how important it was to say how many times I've been cited, and I know the person who gave that feedback is in here today, and that's not a criticism of that, but that is just a point about, that we know that citations have power. And in these cases about who's going to get promoted, who's going to get tenure, who's going to get, the job. Right. And I really like this last point about, citing certain sources and citing those same voices over and over again establishes that as the fact, the truth, the reality. Right. of that discipline. And, and so we are missing those perspectives, we're missing those voices, and we're just putting one version of truth or fact out there based on, a more limited number of voices that are out there. Just some brief overview of some of the citation biases. There's been a good amount of research done, especially in the last few years, looking at issues related to citation biases. Men cite it more than women. White scholars cite it more often than people of color. Found that men tend to cite other men more often. White individuals tend to cite other white individuals more often. And that authors tend to cite folks they know, either personally, through professional contacts, or by name at least, right? And so that creates those webs where it's still those only more, limited number of people that are actually being included in the citations. So based on that, I think it's really important that we highlight, that citation is not neutral. I really love this quote, that citation practices can be a tool for the reification or the resistance to these unethical hierarchies of knowledge production, right? So we can't continue to go ahead and think about citation practices being, something that we do without really giving it much conscious thought. But that's important that we consider that this is it's a political practice. It's it's an action, and it has consequences in the real world. So I'll pause there. I see we have some comments coming in, and I'd love to hear other comments that folks have about, the importance or the need for inclusive citations, why this is something that it's relevant for us to be paying attention to. Next, so we had Carrie shared, in medicine, women's voices were silenced for so long that medicine itself failed women's unique needs. Of course, that is true for so many others as well. Yes, absolutely. Let's see. It also relates to the collection of journals we search, including journals from underrepresented countries and universities. Absolutely. Great point, Judy. The more these processes become automatic, the potential exists for current citation-based power structures and journal metrics to become even more entrenched within data echo chambers. That is a really, really great point, Heidi. Leo shared its anti-racist work. Great point, Judy. Libraries will need to consider database packages to enable researchers to locate new voices. Yeah, thinking about what material we're purchasing for our collections, how that material, as someone mentioned earlier, is presented so that, certain voices tend to come up first, right? Citation metrics are used across campus as part of promotional and tenure practices. Absolutely. Right. So yeah, so this matters. This is really important. Citations impact, us in so many different ways in our roles as scholars, in our roles as researchers, as teachers, as librarians, as students, whatever role we might be in. Citations are important, and so that's why I think it's really important that we are critically thinking about our citation practices. Lynn shared, I think about how systematic reviews can be affected by current citation practices. Who is being left out? To me, it reinforces searching gray literature, etc. Yeah, so expanding that scope of the types of materials that we look at, the journals that we look at, the databases that we look at, maybe looking more for open educational journals, open access journals, right? Journals that aren't cited as much, where you might get some more diverse voices. Wonderful, great. So I wanted to highlight really quickly just, a few different responses around this issue of inclusive citation. And so the first is I just wanted to highlight some of the things that folks are doing to support more inclusive citation practices. So we have several folks that have shared or create a computer code that is intended to help a researcher estimate the gender and racial balance in their work. And I'm going to share some example of these at the end. And these are imperfect tools. There's one you can see on the screen that's a gender citation index analyzer. but there are folks that are working on providing researchers with tools that will allow them to really think about, their reference and the balance that they have in there. A number of folks in a wide range of areas have put together websites or bibliographies that are intended to highlight the work of underrepresented scholars. And again, I'll share some of those at the end as well. But there's a lot of different examples of those that are out there where you can go to find representatives in different fields where you can find those voices. And you're starting to see some journals that are paying attention to this, encouraging folks to, when they're submitting work, to share more personal information so that they can have an idea, the journal, of who's publishing in their journals. And putting together sort of inclusive and diversity forms that folks can fill out that share information about their citation practices and their efforts at diversity there. So some responses are starting to come together for this. It's not widespread that every journal is doing something like this, but there are people that are working to support and promote this idea. Let's see, so we had some comments coming in. Let's see here. Grade literature, yes. So let's see, we had Rebecca shared an essay on modern witness that historicizes male bias inherent in scientific objectivity. Thank you for sharing that, Donna. Carrie shared, it's scary that AI algorithms exclude voices like ChatGPT. What sources is it basing its writing on? That's a really great point, thinking about algorithms. ChatGPT, from what I know, is often making up its citations completely in a lot of ways. Let's see. So Steve shared the issue of incorrect inferences getting into literature and then proliferating doesn't seem to be a problem inherently related to inclusive citations. That does raise the questions about whether those problems might be more or less likely to take hold based on author identity. Great point, Steve. Maya shared, I'm also wondering about if it's still following gender binary and then excluding researchers that are gender queer, two-spirit, non-binary. Yes, absolutely. Great point, Maya. Yep, ChatGPT makes citations look legitimate that are completely made up. Great, thank you all for sharing those. All right. And some critical responses that I wanted to share in terms of folks that are, obviously with a topic like this, you're going to have some folks out there that, are critical of the idea for a range of different reasons. And so some of the feedback that folks that have supported this idea have gotten, where people say, well, I'm only citing the work that is most relevant to me. I'm only citing the work that is the highest quality. And it just happens to be the work of this particular group of people, or that I don't even pay attention to the race or gender. I'm just citing, high quality work. And so that's what I'm doing. And so you get that kind of response coming from folks. And this goes to a comment I think Maya raised about challenges in terms of, first of all, trying to infer race or gender based on someone's name. And then this idea of that there are a lot of different components to diversity that don't fit neatly into this category of just considering someone's race or gender. So there are non-binary folks. There are folks who have other types of diversity that is not something that you can tell just based on what their name is. And so, that really complicates this issue a lot. There have been some folks who've argued that really what you should be focusing on is lessening the impact that citations have as part of, evaluation or assessment process. So lessening the impact of citations in terms of someone's merit. And that's really what we should be focusing on. And I think someone else had made a comment related to this about performative. And so Andrea Baer includes the comment about tokenism, right? Just including a reference or a few references by itself, doesn't really mean much unless you're actually really engaging with the ideas from that scholar, right? And you are incorporating that and letting that shape how you are thinking about your particular topic. So that's something that's really important to avoid when we think about inclusive citations. So I'd love to hear any questions that folks have, any Comments related to any of those criticisms or those concerns that have been raised around this topic. And then for the last part of the workshop, we'll share a bunch of resources and ideas for how we can engage more in the idea of inclusive citation. So again, I'll pause here just to see if there are questions, comments, thoughts before we go ahead and move on. Just check the time here. So Maya shared an interesting point. So as a cataloger, we are moving away from including gender in authority records. So I'm wondering what impact this will have in future research. Thank you for sharing that perspective. I was not aware of that. And so that is a really important point to consider. I think it also relates to, thinking about the different citation formats that folks use. I think that, some of those formats were specifically like, APA only uses initials. And so, what you can determine about someone based on just their initials, right? And I think that a lot of that probably was developed as a way to move away from bias by only having initials that you would not be able to tell that it was a woman and then you would not cite her, right? Jerry shared, so who gets to define quality? Yeah, great question, Jerry. Steve shared, my biggest question here is the pragmatic one. How does one actually make citations more inclusive without knowing the author identities myself? Yes, that is a really big concern, Steve, right? How do we know, and what guesses might be we making about someone based on their name or what we can find out about them online? Are we really accurately representing the identity that they claim, identities that they claim for themselves? Right, absolutely. My shared RDA update for name authority records will no longer say male or female, so that part of the record has been removed. Ajit, shared the problem with the argument about only looking at quality is where do we find the references? Yes, biased algorithms in Google Scholar, PubMed, authors we've seen at conferences get in the way of that. Yes, right. That practice that we have of citation chaining is that this is how we find our citations. We find our citations from other citations. And so it creates a very narrow scope. And unless we deliberately go outside of that traditional practice of how we find our citations, it continues to, those seem to be the quality ones because they're cited the most, but we know that that's not always the case. So David shared, APA states that citations should be recent, prioritizing the last 10 years. Is this an issue with regard to inclusive citations? That's an interesting question, David. Haven't really thought much about the currency, but I think that could potentially be a related issue in terms of, not including voices that are outside of that time period. But yeah, that's a great question. I hadn't really thought much about that. So we had also a comment, Jesse shared, I appreciate you showing both sides of the coin because I was feeling yucky about making assumptions of one's identity based on name, but feels imperative that we widen the voices we find in research. Yeah, it's really tricky, absolutely. So Cameron shared, our department did a syllabus audit. Individuals coded race, gender based on photos, drew attention to huge disparities, but feels reductive at the same time. Interesting, thank you. I worry that removing gender and authority records is really going to make being inclusive harder. We can't fix what we can't measure. Yes, absolutely. And I really would be interested to hear more about the reasoning behind not including gender anymore, and whether that was an actually attempt to lessen bias. I don't know. That's not my area, but I don't know if anyone has information about that. Also comment coming in. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe it was in response to transgender writers who have transitioned but are not out or non-binary or not out. Yeah, so thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Carrie shared the messages in the research may be better reflection versus demographic assignment. All right, so we've got about 20 more minutes left. We've got a lot of resources and sort of ideas to share. Thank you all so much for your great participation so far. This has been such great conversation, so many great ideas that have been shared. So I'm so happy that everyone has been able to engage and share. See, a lot of journals, Madeline shared, now have systems in place for that, not relevant to monograph cataloging, but it's cool to see. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing, Madeline. All right, so for this last part, I'd like you to just reflect individually for yourself at the moment, steps that you could take in your role or your multiple roles, whether it's a researcher, instructor, librarian, student, what roles that you are in, steps that you could take to support citation justice or inclusive citation practices. So again, not required to share at the moment, but just being reflecting on this as we're going through and thinking about these resources. So I think the first step can be something as simple as just learning more about this. And so obviously you're here today, so this is something that you're interested in, and you're already starting to take this first step to learn more about it. But I did want to share some of the resources here that have been really helpful to me to start learning more about this as well. So you can see a few of the different ones. Maha Bali, as I mentioned, has a blog post on inclusive citations. It has some exercises I'm going to talk about in a second that folks can do to start thinking through this process. The site Black Women's Site from Kristen A. Smith, where they talk about sort of the, what led to the formation of this collective. Inclusive citation, Andrea Baer from Rowan University put together this really great guide on inclusive citation that has a lot of recommendations, and then a few others, that I mentioned here as well on citation justice. The last one is a great article from Nature on the rise of citational justice by Diana Kwan. So these are some really great resources that have been really helpful to me. And first of all, just in putting this presentation together, but these are the ones that sort of started to introduce me to this topic and got me thinking about this as an issue that is something that, it's important for us to think about. So that I think is just the first step that you can take if it's something that you're still really just learning about this. There's some exercises, and again, these are recommended by Maha Bali as ways that you can start thinking about your own practice as a researcher, as a scholar, doing some exercises where you, first of all, just, identify one woman or one minority scholar in your field and just start following their work. If they're on social media, start following, them on Twitter, whatever forms, work for following folks in your particular field. But just starting to get to know and identify, because chances are, and this is not always the case, but often women may be more likely to be citing other women. Minority scholars may be more likely to be citing other scholars. And so that could introduce you to some, starting to expand those citation circles that you are in. A couple of different exercises, naming scholars in your field. So taking the time to actually think through, who do I know in my field? What is their race? What is their gender? And, trying to start identifying some folks that are in non-dominant groups in your field and starting to get to know their work. Someone mentioned doing a syllabus audit in their department, taking that time to check your syllabus, thinking about your requirements, your recommended readings, and how you might be able to include more diverse voices there. And as folks mentioned, really engaging with the folks, the work of those folks, and not just, including them to include them. As a researcher, this is something that you can do yourself as a researcher, or if you're working with students to develop their research projects, having students go through some pre-research questions. So before you even get started, think about who really voices do I need to include here? What region, what communities, what people are being impacted by the research that I'm doing. Accessibility could also be an issue here. Who's going to be reading my research or viewing my research or whatever format that research is in? How can I make that more accessible to everyone? So taking that time before you start a research process to start thinking through these questions and using the responses to guide your research strategy. And making those steps really to, expand where you're looking for information. So those pre-research questions could be something that you could do again as a scholar yourself, or something that you could help students work through. Researching your citations, as I mentioned, folks have been developing tools that you could use to get an idea of, gender, racial balance in your citations, but taking that time to look at your own references, doing a little bit of an audit of those references and seeing, based on these initial results, am I missing something? Whose voices are not showing up in this research that I'm doing? Right. As an instructor, I think one of the things that you can do is think about the requirements that you have for the types of sources that students use. And I know that there can be very good reasons to only, require students to include peer-reviewed journal articles. But if you are in a situation where it's appropriate for students to use other types of sources, really expanding the range of acceptable sources that you will see from students, so that you can get some of those more diverse voices, allowing students to use blog posts or interviews, public talks, those kinds of things could potentially get some of those different, more diverse voices there. And then I'll get to the chat in a second. One last thing for this part that I wanted to include, some folks have been supporting the idea of scholars including the citation diversity statements with their submissions. So as part of your reference list, you include a statement where you indicate, here's the percentage of various diversity indicators in my work. Here's how I calculated that. And, letting folks know that you did make an effort and you do have a commitment to trying to include more diverse voices in your research. So that's another option that you might be able to take. So I'll pause there again, since we have had a lot of comments coming in. Try to go back a little bit. So yes, there will be a recording available, absolutely, and slides will be shared as well. That's okay, Leah, yep. Right. Yeah, empty reply box, because you can now do like threaded replies in the chat. So Judy shared, even if you can't find information about the person, you could look at the institutions represented in citations. Are the big names universities the only ones represented? Maybe you could search for researchers from smaller colleges where researchers might not be getting their work noticed. I think that is a really great idea, Judy, because we do know that certain types of people are more likely to be hired at certain types of institutions. And so if you're only citing folks from Harvard and Yale and, MIT, there could be some really great research out there from folks at lesser known institutions that you might be missing. Great idea. Wonderful. All right, so a few additional teaching activities and resources. As scholars, we can also help others out to the degree we are comfortable by adding more demographic information to our bios on ORCID, Google Scholar, our websites. Yeah, that's a great idea as well. If we are comfortable doing so, sharing more information about ourselves so that we can be found and folks can make those determinations. All right, so a few more sort of ideas for teaching activities and resources that we might be able to share. So if you are interested in getting into this discussion with students, Utah State University has put together a great, fairly short, I think it's only about 3 minutes, video that I think does a really good overview of this topic that is accessible for undergraduate students. So really just kind of explaining, the idea that you're going to be missing a lot of perspectives if you don't really pay attention to who you're citing. So I think that this could be a great resource to get into an opening discussion with your students around this topic, having them watch the video, write a reflection, reflect on their own citation practices, whether it's something that they've ever really thought of before. So I think that that's a great tool to use to get started if you wanted to have a classroom discussion around this. This is an activity that was developed by librarian Liz Bellamy, which she calls Whose Shoulders Are You Standing On? And this provides students with some readings, including the Mahabali reading that I've mentioned a couple of times, and then working through with students, analyzing the gender dynamics of an article, where you could, revise this and look at other aspects as well. But using that practice or that activity as a way to get students just thinking about this topic, discussing concerns that they might have related to whose voices might be missing as we start looking at those citations. So that could be a great activity that you could use with students. I wanted to raise the issue. Those folks that are librarians or that's been to one of my workshops before have probably heard of the authority as constructed and contextual concept. This is a concept from the Framework for Information Literacy for Higher Education that really tries to highlight sort of the key guiding conceptual understandings that really impact a lot of our expectations around research assignments. And so it really highlights this idea that within different contexts, different voices are considered more authoritative than others. And so that certain types of sources are often considered more acceptable in certain situations than others. Getting into a discussion about this concept with students, I think, could also be an interesting way to get into this idea of inclusive citations, because it raises a lot of questions as you're thinking about this concept about who are considered the authority in this field, what types of sources are considered authority and why. What are concerns about identifying certain types of voices or certain types of sources as the most authoritative within the field. So I have an authorities constructed and contextual sort of online guide that goes over what this concept means. And I think that could be an interesting tool to use to start a discussion around issues of authority within the field and what makes an authoritative voice and who might be missing when we too narrowly limit our understanding of what authoritative sources look like. All right, so then, as I mentioned, I have lots of resources to share. And so these are just in a range of different areas. The handout that I have that's in the folder, put that in folder one more time. So in that link where you can find the slides and the other materials, I have a handout there that has all of these resources listed there as well. But I just tried to find as many different types of resources that I could in terms of bibliographies or websites that highlight the work of underrepresented scholars. So Cite Black Women, I already mentioned, Cite Her Bibliography in Computer Science. People of Color Also Know Stuff in Political Science. There's a few different reading lists here as well. So I've tried to find a range of different areas of resources that are available to folks. A few more, some libraries have put together guides for finding diverse voices or, resources for finding, marginalized or underrepresented scholars. So all of those are available, great places for you to get started if you are looking for diverse voices yourself or you want your students to be looking for more diverse voices as well. I mentioned earlier that folks have been putting together, diversity audit tools, computer codes that you can use to analyze the gender or racial balance of your citations. And I mentioned Andrea Baer put this list together. So just wanted to mention that she was the one that did that, not me. But here's a few different options that you have. I did try the first one earlier, and it didn't really work very well with the way that my reference lists were formatted. And so, I think there's some challenges in terms of how the lists are formatted and the kind of technical skill that you need to be able to use some of these tools. But I did want to mention that, there are some resources that are available if you're interested in taking a look at those. All right, so as we're coming to the end, I wanted to go back to the question that we had at the beginning of this section and have you all think again about what is one step that you could take in whatever role that you have or multiple roles that you have to support citation justice. And if you feel comfortable sharing that in the chat, I would love to hear what those steps are. If you don't feel comfortable, that is okay as well. And then also just if you have any key takeaways from the workshop that you would like to share or any questions that you would like to share. So references, image attributions, all of those are there. And again, you can access all of those on the slides that are shared in that link in the chat. And I will send everyone a follow-up email as well with links to everything so that you'll all have that. So we'll go back here and then we'll open it up for questions, comments, thoughts, action steps that folks would like to take or that you're planning to take, hoping to take. All right, so some resources, comments that are coming in. Make sure I didn't miss anything. So Elizabeth shared another good one that I use in my teaching that I don't see on the list as 500 queer scientists. Thank you so much for sharing that, Elizabeth. Absolutely. I did not have that one on the list. Leo shared, asked you to come to CFAES to collaborate in a 2-part workshop using this content. I'll be in touch. Wonderful, Leo. I will be looking forward to hearing from you. Absolutely. Becca, many thanks for the helpful resources. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Leo. Wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to, thank you, Eileen. I'm going to stop recording, but I will stick around for a few more minutes in case other folks have questions, comments, thoughts that they would like to share.